Let's move on quickly to Ukraine. And Vanessa, what's going on with? We've got a new model for losses on the Ukrainian side.
Yeah, this was actually shared. I just came across it today. It was shared by the Telegram channel Donbass Insider, which obviously is related to the Donbass forces very much. It's a neutral website. It claims to be neutral, and effectively it's translated from the Russian, so the English is not perfect. But so starting from May, I won't go into all the details. Basically, they started tracing. They have more than 125,000 records. They have, as you can see on the left, a search box for people to put in a request to find relatives that are potentially missing in action, killed in action, captured, and so on. People can go to the website wartears.org. It seems to be very well put together. I've taken an example of their various graphs. First of all, the armed forces of Ukraine, soldiers killed in action. To date, on the 3rd of November, 106,223. If we look at the graph below that, the overall AFU numbers, including active, killed, and captured soldiers. So I've basically broken it down based on the graphs that are available at the website. Active in the AFU. Now that, as far as I understand from the website, that also includes the kind of the ADAR, the various Nazi or ultra-nationalist battalions, etc. So it's not only the official army, the official military, although of course those battalions have been absorbed into the official military. So active in the AFU, 367,384. Now bear in mind that Russia has committed fairly small numbers of troops initially in February for the special military operation, but we know that 300,000 reservists, so formerly had been in the army or had had military training, are heading to the front line. So that gives an indication of the parity now between the Russian forces and the Ukrainian forces. And of course, not all the Ukrainian forces are at the Donbass front lines. Killed and captured, so the combination of killed and captured, 130,687. Now, I just did a very quick exercise of trying to find out if mainstream media, particularly the BBC or CNN or any of the mainstream media outlets, were keeping a tally of the Ukrainian forces' losses. And the simple answer is no, not really. And I just picked one at random. And I just wanted to point out the language here. The first line basically says the armed forces of Ukraine have killed at least 1,500 Russian soldiers in the war over the weekend. Now, I can't remember. This was dated. I haven't actually included the date there. But I just wanted to point out the way that this is worded, not that the Russian forces had losses of X, but the armed forces of Ukraine have killed. So there's a very definite bias towards the Ukrainian forces. Of course, we shouldn't be surprised by that. But what I wanted to point out is how this fits into the 10 points of war propaganda that were established by a Belgian historian, Anne Morelli, in 2001, known as the 10 Commandments of Propaganda. If we go immediately to number 7, we suffer few losses. The enemy's losses are considerable. That obviously fits into the point that I was just making. But I'll just very quickly run through them. Number 1, we don't want war. We are only defending ourselves. 2, our adversary is solely responsible for this war. Is this sounding very familiar already? 3, our adversary's leader is inherently evil and resembles the devil. 4, we are defending a noble cause, not our own interests. 5, the enemy is purposefully committing atrocities. If we are making mistakes, then this happens without intention. 6, the enemy makes use of illegal weapons. Remember the chemical weapon events in Syria designed to criminalize the Syrian government. 7, as I said, we suffer few losses. The enemy's losses are considerable. 8, recognized intellectual and artists support our cause. The celebrity cult, war fetishism comes under that bracket. 9, and of course, remember all of the celebrities that have visited Zelensky in Kiev. 9, our cause is sacred. 10, whoever casts, I think that's meant to be, doubt on our propaganda helps the enemy and is a traitor, and we're seeing that happening right now, of course.
Yes, indeed. Okay, thank you for that. Now let's move on to the issue of Russia's allegations against the UK. And here, first of all, from her Telegram channel is Maria Zakharova. Let's do a quick translation of this. So this was on the 1st of November. She said, "To be honest, I don't care who got this information or how it was obtained. I'm interested in London's answer to the following question. Did British Prime Minister Liz Truss send a message to US Secretary of State Antony Blinken immediately after the Nord Stream gas pipeline was blown up with the words, 'It's done' or 'It's over with'? An official answer to this question is expected by millions of people around the world who have the right to know what happened to world energy security and what the role of the Anglo-Saxons is in the terrorist attack." So Alex, that was a couple of days ago. We've obviously been covering over the last couple of days, the last couple of news programs, the allegations of hacks of mobile phones and so on, and the fact that Russia is now openly saying that the United Kingdom in particular is behind a lot of what is going on against Russia in the Ukraine at the moment. So yesterday then they invited, shall we say in inverted commas, the British ambassador to come visit them in Moscow.
Yes, Deborah Bronnert was invited to the Foreign Ministry in Moscow yesterday for a démarche, the diplomatic term for a strong protest, but which isn't handed over with a title saying Russia protest, but is read out as a verbal message because the next stage is an ultimatum and then persona non grata. So it's pretty stiff stuff. First of all, I decided to see what the British gutter press, in this case, the form of the Express, was making of it. Look at the adjective and adverb soup here. Ukraine. Putin threatens UK with extraordinary, unpredictable and dangerous response. Vladimir Putin has launched an extraordinary threat against the UK after bizarrely accusing it of being involved in a humiliating Russian defeat in the Black Sea. The UK's ambassador to Russia was summoned by Moscow to answer for unfounded allegations that Britain was involved. Nothing on there except that at the bottom they have, probably because the journalists now are too junior to know not to strip this out, they have included the fact that it was a démarche. I hadn't seen this when David Scott asked me yesterday evening to make one of my segments the detail of what the Russians had said to Deborah Bronnert. I thought I was going to have to do some translating from the Russian, as Vanessa and you have been doing. So the next slide was really just a placeholder because RIA Novosti, the more or less official news agency, together with TASS in Russia, was covering this in some detail, and what's on screen in Russian, believe me, is simply just the Express's coverage of the same thing, but no need, because the Russians are so dastardly that they actually do this. And this is something that we can learn from excellent Russia watchers to do more often. Joseph Farrell in the States, Alexander Mercouris at the Duran always say, go and read the Ministry of Foreign Affairs' readouts of calls, particularly the Russians, because they are, as I say, dastardly enough to give the full text of what they've read out, which Britain hardly ever does. So here in fluent English, by the Russians' own translation service in-house in the Foreign Ministry, is the whole text of what the British ambassador was told. And by the way, she had people at the door greeting her with banners saying Britain is a terrorist state. So, in connection with the Russian Defense Ministry's reports about the United Kingdom's involvement in the October 29th terrorist attack against the Black Sea Fleet in Sevastopol, British Ambassador to Russia Deborah Bronnert was summoned to the Russian Foreign Ministry on November the 3rd. Everything that follows is described by the boilerplate people at the Express as extraordinary, unfounded and outlandish. A strong protest in connection with the British military specialists' active participation and training and providing supplies to the units of the Ukrainian Special Operations Forces, including with the goal of conducting acts of sabotage at sea, were expressed to the ambassador. concrete facts of that kind of activities by London were provided. So obviously that doesn't go in the démarche. The démarche emphasized, or rather it doesn't go in the press release about the démarche. The démarche emphasized, say the Russians, that such confrontational actions by the British pose the threat of an escalation and can lead to unpredictable and dangerous consequences. It was pointed out that such hostile provocations were unacceptable, and a demand was put forward to stop them immediately. Should these acts of aggression that are fraught with direct implication in the conflict continue, the responsibility for their harmful consequences and the mounting tension in relations between our countries will lie entirely with the British side. And by the way, the RIA Novosti coverage of this event has further down the page a link to another relevant article, which is simply entitled Britain is building its casus belli, its cause for war with Russia. So the démarche readout continues. It was noted in particular that an agreement was reached in September 2020 between London and Kiev to expand the British instructors training program for Ukrainian military divers. In late 2020, the parties began implementing the naval training initiative for the Ukrainian Navy, which included training courses for combat swimmers. British-Ukrainian naval cooperation is further reinforced under the Joint Multinational Training Group Ukraine program. There's a whole paragraph I won't read out giving units details about that, cities where this training of underwater frogmen has taken place. The Russians continue with the participation of British specialists. The Ukrainian Navy carried out dives and a training detonation of a target on the coast and in the Black Sea near 3 cities, Odessa, Nikolaev, and Ochakov. In August to September, on Pervomaisky Island in the Dnieper estuary, 3 kilometers south of Ochakov, British military instructors, about 15 men, so I presume they're going on an observation by the Russian forces, taught servicemen from the armed forces of Ukraine to operate unmanned underwater vehicles designed to destroy ships. In August, September, also, the British trained the crews of minesweepers that were transferred to Ukraine. We have information, the Russians finished, that the British Navy has also transferred a certain number of UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, to Ukraine. Of course, there's no substance to anything the Russians say, you understand. If you just read the Express or any similar title or the BBC, you'll just get the falsely and the unfoundedlys and the favourite adverbs. To complete this segment, Global Village Space, and the writer in question, Slavisha Batko Milačić, is a young historian from Serbia and Montenegro. He studied in Montenegro, but I think he's a Serb, has written this. This is part of a piece which has the overall headline, How NATO Planned a Preemptive Strike on Russia. He hasn't given sources. It's a single source claim. So take it with a pinch of salt, even if it does seem sincerely written. But this is about a 2021 exercise with the French carrier strike fleet, the Charles de Gaulle being the centerpiece of it, which of course was agreed to be shared with Britain at some point, as we've covered in the past. But it was allegedly a French Navy-led exercise around Corsica in 2021, about a year ago, late autumn, just over a year. Now, unnamed journalists, Milačić hasn't given us his sources here, says unnamed journalists came into possession of data related to the POLARIS exercise, that exercise off Corsica. And I won't read it all out, but it's about the fact that, as usual with these exercises, it's reds and blues, the usual fictionalized scenario with the combined armed operations, in this case Navy and Air Force, but there's also Navy and Army sometimes, or Air Force and Army. But it's claimed that the papers that were handed out to the participants said that in response to the alleged Russian intervention, the forces of the NATO coalition would form and send an aircraft carrier strike group led by the Charles de Gaulle aircraft carrier to the combat area in order to, quote, stop the invasion and preserve the sovereignty of Ukraine. Now, that was over a year ago. And I noticed in Vanessa's segment the date line that she couldn't quite read. It seems to have been the 30th of October that the International Business Times carried that piece about Russian losses. It was also striking that she mentioned Arthur Ponsonby as writing this cynical, many a true word spoken in irony kind of description of the difference between our aims and the dastardly enemy's aims, because it was also Arthur Ponsonby as junior minister at the Foreign Office who on April Fool's Day 1924 stood up and told Parliament that from now on Her Majesty's government would assume that if the Parliament didn't complain within 20 days, a treaty would be considered ratified. So, if you don't grumble, the usual UK column sign-off line, qui tacet considere videtur, he who is silent is regarded as consenting.
Yes. Okay, and I just want to move on quickly to this from UN News. UN still sees no sign of biological weapons in Ukraine. They claim United Nations is not aware of any biological weapons program in Ukraine. A senior official in the Office of Disarmament Affairs reiterated on Thursday in a briefing in the Security Council. And this is from a little while ago. Why am I mentioning it now? Well, on Wednesday, the UN Security Council did not, they voted against a Russian effort to establish a UN commission to examine the evidence that Russia had gathered from about US-run biological labs in Ukraine. Nonetheless, despite the fact that they lost the vote, of course, the British had lots to say about it. So Barbara Woodward said this: the UK voted against this resolution in order to protect the integrity of the Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention and avoided being undermined by unfounded accusations. Russia's allegations of US and Ukrainian biological activities were given a full hearing in September under Article 5 of the Convention. At that meeting, Ukraine and the USA provided a comprehensive response to Russia's allegations. Russia's long-standing disinformation efforts undermine peaceful biological cooperation under Article 10, a vitally important aspect of the Convention. We must defend peaceful biological cooperation against unfounded, malicious allegations. So that was the British position. The Russians, this is Dmitry Polyansky, saying it's now obvious that Western states are simply afraid that a commission may be created to look into the materials submitted by the Russian Federation and conduct a relevant investigation as envisaged by the BTWC. Under the elaboration process of this draft resolution, Western states demonstrated in every possible way that they placed themselves above the law and were not going to implement this provision. Absolutely unwilling on the Western side to have any kind of investigation into the biolabs that were in Ukraine and have subsequently fallen into Russian hands. Russians have gathered quite a bit of evidence for that. Just for the record, China voted for the resolution with Russia. United States, Britain, and France opposed it, and 10 other countries didn't vote or abstained. And then finally on this, from me, the UK has decided to implement a ban on shipping UK shipping Russian oil. So Jeremy Hunt saying, we continue to stand by Ukraine in the face of Putin's barbaric and illegal invasion. We've banned the import of Russian oil into the UK and are making good progress on phasing it out completely. So they're putting this ban in place so that UK ships and services can't be involved in shifting Russian oil after the 5th of December 2022. And this, of course, the UK government is saying paves the way to the price cap that they're intending to try to impose on seaborne Russian crude oil. Hunt went on to say the new measure continues to turn the screws on Putin's war machine, making it even tougher for him to profiteer from his illegal war. Yeah, same usual rhetoric. And then, Vanessa, just to end, what's going on in Russia with respect to immigration?
Yeah, well, I just found again that I found this really interesting. I saw it yesterday, and of course, when I was in Russia, they were talking to me then in regards to the international observers, if life was really made unbearable for them because they had participated in the independent observance of the referenda in the various areas of Donbass, then they would be fast-tracked to asylum in Russia. So I already had an inkling that Russia was preparing to open its doors. But here it's quite fascinating. Here, Russia is set to unilaterally ease visa procedure for foreigners, the Kremlin. The government should develop and present proposals on introducing a visa-free regime for foreigners traveling to Russia for tourist, business, or educational purposes, as well as those participating in sports or cultural events. All measures should be introduced regardless of the principle of reciprocity. A document published by the Kremlin said the decision was taken following a meeting, blah, blah, blah. The order also suggested increasing the validity period of multi-entry visas, as well as easing the regulations in the field of tourism and the border checks of Russian tourist vessels. So an extraordinary sort of opening up of borders and entry into Russia during a time of war. What do we see in contrast? Of course, I'll go through, I'm not going to go through it all, but basically you have Suella Braverman, of course, declaring that refugees who cross the channel in dinghies will be banned from claiming asylum in the UK, so they will not be heard. Even there are concerns that the government is quietly walking back its house a Ukrainian refugee policy, which of course was very much at the forefront of their policy at the start of the Russian special military operation. So I just find it quite extraordinary, Russia's, let's say, openness to foreigners coming to Russia compared to the West basically shutting down on asylum and entry into their countries.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Well, thank you for that. Thank you to Alex and Patrick as well. We're absolutely out of time, so we've got to leave it there for today. We will be back in a few minutes for some extra on the main live stream. But otherwise, we'll see you at 1 p.m. as usual on Monday. I hope everyone has a great weekend, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.